Test, test. Am I live? Am I here? Am I real? Is this the real world? Do I exist? Right, I'm on a live stream. This is live. This is me streaming. I am me. You are you. Thank you for being here. If you were waiting in the waiting room. Let's kick this off. Before we kick this off, please go away. Right, please leave me alone. Live stream. This is live. Oh jeez, what's going on here? Yeah, please leave me alone. I just want to do this alone. Okay, good. If you're still here, then you passed the test. Congratulations. You passed the streaming test. Right, what am I going to do? What are we doing? Today I'm going to be showing off some stuff. So a while ago I posted a... hello Mihai. If you're in the chat, please let yourself be known so I know you're there. Yeah, so I posted a roadmap a little while ago, the V4 roadmap. Actually, I'll tell you what, I can show you. I can actually show you the real blog post as it existed. Right, so first look at the V4 roadmap. So I posted this a little while back. This was back in January, outlining a bunch of things that I wanted to have either implemented in full or kind of spec'd out and understood fully before Benthos is bumped up to major version 4. It's currently on major version 3, and it's been that way for more than a year now, and that means there's been no breaking changes in that time, which means there is a lot of kind of dead code and deprecated stuff lying around that it would be nice to clean up eventually. But before I do that V4 bump, there's a bunch of stuff that I want to get done. And one of those things, one of the major ones, is a brand new plugins API. So Benthos has had a public API for registering plugins, and it's been that way for a little while. However, the main issue with those APIs is that they're hooking into Benthos internals. And the way that the Benthos project has been structured in the past is with this lib directory that just contains, I mean, the majority of this stuff should be in internal. And the reason why it's not is because internal wasn't a thing when I first came up with this structure. So I have this directory lib. Some projects have a directory called package, pkg. And again, that kind of pattern appeared after I came up with this. I got there first, but what I eventually want to do is only have two packages. One is internal, and that's stuff that is core to Benthos as a service, and breaking changes can be made because none of these APIs are exposed to people using Benthos as a library. And then the other directory would be public. And this is where all the APIs would exist for using some Benthos goodies. So for example, you can use the Bloblang package. So this is already released and considered stable at this point. This is the Bloblang package where you can register Bloblang methods and functions to do your own custom stuff. And you can also execute and parse Bloblang. So there's going to be some stuff in here for basically just reusing things that Benthos has to offer in a nice encapsulated package. And then there's also going to be a package where you can register plugins for various Benthos components. So that would be inputs, outputs, caches, rate limits, processors, all that good stuff. So I think for most people, you probably want to make a Bloblang plugin. So if you use this API to register a plugin and then you just built Benthos with that plugin, then you're pretty much good to go. But some people want to add their own custom inputs and outputs and processes and things. And the reason why this package is so special is because A, it's just one place. It's one package with all the functions you need. And the second thing is this is completely isolated. There's basically an air gap between this package and what it's offering you as a user and Benthos internals, which means I can make breaking changes to the internals for the sake of, maybe it's performance, maybe it's correctness or something like that. And it's not going to pull the rug out from underneath any plugin users because the APIs here are going to be the same. The way that it interacts with Benthos internals might be slightly different. So this is just going to make it a lot easier for me. This is mostly for me as a maintainer. It's going to make my life easier to maintain Benthos over time because it means I can get rid of dead code. But what I'm also trying to do is make these APIs nicer, easier to implement, easier to understand for you, so that there is a bit of trade-off. There's a little something in for the plugin developers to incentivize you to use these. So the state that it's in right now is, I think I've got the basics. I think that this is good enough, and what I am looking for is I'm looking for feedback. So what I want is two things. The first is, do these APIs make sense? Do people think that they're correct? And whether they're intuitive. And the other thing is whether it's enough. Are these APIs, because some of them are a lot simpler. I'm going to walk you through each bit. But some of these are going to be significantly simpler APIs than the existing ones. So for example, inputs and outputs are the major ones, where the API that you provide is it's a lot simpler to understand, but then the trade-off on that is maybe it's not going to be as powerful. So swings and roundabouts in it. And also obviously there's a lot of stuff within lib, because obviously all these packages are exposed. Technically you can use any of this stuff. So what I need feedback from people that are using functionality in here. If that functionality doesn't exist in public, then I need you to let me know which bits in particular you want, because obviously I'm going to have these plugin APIs reach stability and give people a long period of time to migrate, but then eventually I will be getting rid of the old APIs, obviously with a major version bump. So if there's stuff within lib that you want to be a public API, then yeah, you need to let me know that this is something you rely on. And the best way to do that is to have a little go at migrating. If you've got existing plugins, have a little go at migrating those to the new APIs. And if you come across a bump in the road that forces you to import lib, then yeah, I'm going to open a discussion on the repo. It'll be the first GitHub discussion I think we've ever had on the repository, because people normally open up issues for their questions. And yeah, I'm just going to leave it open for people to post the bits that they want, and then hopefully we can get ahead of that well in advance of any of this stuff disappearing. And then I'm not in a mad rush to, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to put out version 4 and then the next day everybody's like, oh, but what about the API for stripping potatoes? Oh, I want that. Well, you should have let me know about that before, because I'm not going to miss out on my Friday evening Pokemon tournament just to implement your potato strippers. So yeah, so okay, let's start. Let's get into this, because I'm sick of talking. Let's silently walk through the code base. So I'm going to have to talk, because I'm going to have to describe what's going on here. So the first thing is, I'll tell you what, actually, let's use GoDoc for this. Yeah, I'm going to run GoDoc from the repo. We want to look at this. Okay, so this is what GoDoc would look like if you were pointing it at the new package. And yeah, so we've got there's functionality for registering your plugins. And obviously there's some components that you'll need to understand while doing that. And then there is currently a single function, just run CLI, that is just going to execute Benthos as it currently exists. Oh, hang on, sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. So yeah, this is the web page. What will appear? Obviously, you're going to see it on the flashy new Go Docs website. And yeah, let me pick out one of these examples. So what you're going to see. So let's look at a cache plugin to begin with. Actually, it's probably easier for me to show you the interface. So this is the interface that you will be implementing if you want to write a cache plugin. Now, the first thing you should notice is that everything has context, and also there's a TTL field that you add. I think other than that, this is actually pretty much the exact same. It's a little bit simpler in that there's not a set all method on that yet. I think what I'll probably do is I will make it so that you don't have to implement set all and add all, and you can just keep it nice and simple where you're always setting and getting and adding single key values. But then if you want to implement a more advanced API, a more advanced interface, then you're free to do that, and it will utilize that for them performances. So yeah, what you would do is you would create a type that implements that interface, and then you'll call register cache. And the signature for this, so this is just a singleton method. You just call this plain, and it will register the plugin globally for any of the components to instantiate, I guess. And what you do is you have a name that has to be unique, that identifies the component type. This also has to be, I think it's snake case underscores, and I think I enforce that. And then what you have is a spec. So I'll dig into this a little bit more, but this essentially describes what the configuration looks like for your plugin type. And this is a little bit more advanced than the old way of doing things, which was just to give you this really kind of opaque function signature that you have to implement. It's a bit confusing. And then finally, you actually have the constructor. And the constructor signature is you have a config type which will exist based on the spec that you've provided. There'll be something there. And then you have this, what I'm calling a manager. It's a really generic name, but basically this is a thing that provides you a bunch of context around the Benthos service. And yeah, I think I'll dig into that a little bit more in a minute. But what it looks like in a nutshell, if we have a look at one of these examples, is, so I've implemented just an example here called lossy cache. This is just a map in memory. And I've just made it occasionally drop things if the capacity has been reached. So yeah, I've got some very, very simple implementations of these methods. So you can set, you can add, which means if the item already exists, we return an error. And then you've got delete, and then pretty much all components that you define plugins for implement this close method. And this is how we do graceful shutdown now. So in the old world, there used to be two methods. One would kick off shutdown asynchronously with a close async method, and then another would block until that close has occurred. And there is logical reason for me having that signature internally, but I think as plugin users, it's kind of pointless. It doesn't really serve anything. So what you've got now is just one method, similar to a lot of components where you're just closing, and this is supposed to block until you've successfully cleaned up all your resources. So you've closed your connection, you've committed offsets, all that kind of stuff. But obviously, if the context is cancelled, then you exit immediately. And you return an error if there was a problem. Mostly that's just going to be if the context was cancelled. However, I suspect the overwhelming majority of implementations are probably not going to really have much state that they need to clean up, so it's just going to be this where you return nil. Then what you do is you basically got to do two things, three things. You have to pick a really cool name. That's the first and most difficult job. And then you specify a configuration for what your what should be embedded within a Benthos config to describe how to run your component. Now, you might not have any configuration fields, so maybe every instance of your plugin type is the exact same and there is no custom configuration or anything that needs to happen before it runs, in which case you can actually just provide a service, new config spec, and Benthos will then respect the fact that there's no config. We're not expecting any config fields for the component type. However, I think quite often there is going to be some fields, and the way that that's going to work is you have, so I think I'm going to have multiple ways of doing this, but the first way that I've actually implemented is basically the same as now, where you implement a function signature that returns a pointer to a reference to a structure that contains fields that can be embedded in YAML. So what I've got here is the actual lossy cache itself contains the configuration parameters, and it looks a bit like this. So it's like if you had any type that you were going to serialize to YAML, and you have the little YAML tag in here. Now, for now, Benthos just supports YAML, and I don't have any immediate plans to support other configuration types for now, but there's nothing stopping me from doing that. So, for example, I could add in TOML support. You, as a plugin author, if that's going to be something that you want to use, so maybe if I add in TOML support one day, and you decide you actually want to use that, well, then you're going to need to go back on your configuration structs in that case and add the new tags to make sure it gets parsed correctly. But obviously there will be defaults, so it should just work for most cases, but you'll probably need to come in and add stuff like that. But for now, it's just YAML. And basically what we'll do is in the function signature here, we will return so it has to be a reference type because that's how the parser works. If it's not a reference type, then it will split up and cause a kerfuffle. So yeah, you have to remember to always return a pointer thing. Could just be a map, I think, as well, if you wanted to go down that route. And ideally, you should populate this with sensible defaults. Eventually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand the config spec API so that you can actually just add in like a list of fields that you're expecting, similar to the Golang flags package, or if you've already had a look at the Bloblang plugins API, the way that it does arguments there, I think it'll be something similar to that. Like as well, a lot of the CLI tools in general, they allow you to specify a field name and then a description, a default value, things like that. So you're not having to kind of always deal with configs as structs, because that's not always what people want. But yeah, I think I'll leave that to later because I'm focusing on the minimum to get people migrating to this first. And then the next thing is you actually provide the constructor function, and that's the signature that I just showed you. So what you're provided is a config, which if you've used this config constructor here, whatever you've returned here, that's what's going to come out. So what I've done is I've casted the conf type here into my lossy cache, and because this is also it's the cache itself, I've basically already constructed my cache thing. Obviously, I would need to initialize items because that won't be initialized, and I don't do that here, so I need to actually fix my example. Mihai, it might be cool if the defaults can be specified in the struct tag directly. Not sure if that's what you meant. Oh, that's a good point, actually. I'm not sure if the YAML... Oh, I might need to look into that because I bet that is something that you can specify. If not, I could add a custom tag or something. I think I probably wouldn't go down the route of, I don't know. I'll need to look into that. But yeah, that's definitely something that you could put as a tag if you wanted to. Yeah, and then that's it. So we've returned our instantiation of the thing, and I haven't had to use this manager thing. To be honest, I think for most people you won't need to use it, but I'll show you what it is. It is so it's a type called resources. Now I've chosen to expose this as a struct, not an interface, and my rationality for that is I don't expect anybody to. If this was an interface, then that kind of fits with a lot of Go standards, I guess, where you're accepting interfaces in your function signature. But the limit with that is if I change an interface, technically that's a breaking change because you might, as a plugin user, have implemented that interface. So if I add new functionality, I would have to hide that, and you'd have to do a sort of advanced interface cast or something like that. And that's what's happened already with the internal manager package. I've had to silently add new functionality as and when it was needed, and it's been kind of opaque. So what I've done here is I'm just giving you a struct, and that allows me to ensure that you're not, well, it kind of prevents you from instantiating it yourself, which you're not supposed to do. And also it means that I can add new methods and things to it without breaking backwards compatibility. That's the theory anyway. Whether that is actually the case, I don't know, somebody might come along and say, actually, that's a breaking change. I don't think it is. I don't think there's any reason why that would break anybody's code. And yeah, what you can do is, so obviously Benthos has resources, so cache resources, rate limits, and the whole point of those is that they can be defined in your config and then used by other components. So for example, a cache might be used by the deduplicate processor. And the way that you would do that in your plugins is with this resources thing. So you'll be able to, it gives you a function for accessing the cache, and you identify it by name, and you provide a function that is provided a cache. And that's pretty much it. It's a very simple signature. And at the end of the day, if this isn't enough, I can potentially add new methods. So I can add access cache v2, for example. Mihai, can this struct be copied around? The pointer can be moved, so you can send it around. This resources type is going to be thread safe, so you can pass it to however many child components as you want. But yeah, it's a pointer, so you won't be able to do any kind of deep copy or something, but you shouldn't need to. You should be able to just pass the reference around. The other thing it's got is a label method. So when this is given to your constructor function, it knows the label of your component as it's instantiated in config. So actually, maybe I should show you, because this is a fairly new thing. Let me show you a component. So all components now you can specify a label, and that affects observability stuff. So any logs that are emitted by the component type and metrics and things, that stuff will be identified by label if you provided it. Otherwise, the label gets generated based on where it sits in config. So what I've done is I've added a method label to the resources type that allows you to access what your component's label is, just in case you want to use that for various things. And then I've also given you access to a logger, and this is a pretty simple, again, this is a struct, so I can expand it if I need to later. It's a very simple interface because I don't want people doing complex stuff, basically. I just want to support the bare minimum. And this will already be enriched with the label of your component type. Eventually, I might give you access to metrics as well, but it's quite a complicated interface, so I might leave that for now, just to keep things nice and lean. But one thing I will say is that all the component types have default metrics already. So when you register a processor, input, output, cache plugins, you don't have to manually add the metrics. They will automatically be there. So for example, when you register a cache plugin, each instantiation of your cache plugin will emit metrics about how many times gets have occurred, whether they've errored out, and things like that. All the stuff that you might expect from a Benthos typical component is going to be in there. Yeah, I think that's pretty much universal with all the different types. Because at the end of the day, I feel like that's one of those things that is mostly just boilerplate, and it's usually always the same stuff. It's whether your thing errored, how many times it's been hit, stuff like that. But obviously, if at some point people really want to be able to define their own custom metrics, then yeah, I'll consider putting that in. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. So I'll go through some of the other examples, because each of these different component types examples works. I've made them all work a slightly different way. So we've got a gibberish input type, which just generates random gunk and returns it. And for this particular one, I've defined a configuration type, which is separate from the instantiation itself. And I define my config spec around it, and then it's all the same stuff. So my I cast out my config type from the generic conf thing, and then I instantiate my gibberish input with that. And yeah, I'll show you the signatures for inputs and outputs, because I think that the biggest change between actually, I'll show you processors first. So processors are really confusing right now, because when you return an error from a current processor plugin, the signature is you've got any number of batches on the output, which most people don't care about. You might have multiple messages, but most plugin authors don't want to provide, they don't want to output multiple batches. So I've added that as a specialized batch processor plugin type that you can define. But a normal processor is one message in and then 0 or more messages out. Most of the time it's going to be one message in, one message out. Or you can return just an error. It's just a Golang error, and not one of those opaque kind of ACK types, which is a little bit confusing. And to be honest, it's not really the right paradigm for processors anyway. A processor should either fail or succeed, and the way that processor errors are handled in Benthos is different to ACKs anyway. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of exposing that in the interface now. So what you return is one or more messages, or you can return an error. And if you return an error, then what happens is the message will get flagged as having failed, and then you can use normal Benthos error handling mechanisms. It's the same as everything else. So you can do things like catch in order to catch those errors, or you can do things like dead letter queue them or filter them or whatever. But yeah, it's basically the same kind of thing. So it's a much simpler interface, and also now context is getting passed around pretty much everywhere. And obviously that wasn't the case before, because those interfaces originally predated context. Interesting little bit of history for you there. I'll show you quickly the batch processor thing. So you might be looking at that interface and thinking, well, okay, how do I do windowed processing? So if you've batched messages up at the input level and you've created a sort of window, then how would I create a processor plugin that acts across a group of messages? And the answer to that is there's a specific batch processor. And I can show you what the interface looks like. So it's pretty much the same, except the method is called process batch. And what you get as an input is one or more messages. And what you provide is a 2D array now of messages. And if you've already implemented plugins, then you'll also have noticed by now that I'm only ever talking in terms of message. There's no concept of message versus part. And again, that's some nastiness that I never think, I think I never should have exposed that to real human beings, because it doesn't really make any sense. In the documentation for Benthos, I normally just talk about messages and batches of messages, where a batch is kind of synonymous with a window. It's also synonymous with a multi-part message. But internally, in the code base, I talk about a message as a batch, and a message part is an individual message. And yeah, it's super confusing, and it's just because that's when I first started off, one of the first connectors Benthos had was 0MQ, so I was dealing in multi-part messages kind of natively, so it made sense at that point to talk about a message as being a group of individual payloads, which are called parts. But that kind of terminology is old, and it's outdated now because the overwhelming number of Benthos connectors kind of talks in the language of messages, and then batches as a kind of additional concept. So yeah, your plugins now, there's just a message type, and again I've gone with a struct, and again I'm kind of hoping to get feedback on this, because obviously this is like I said, it's a thing, and the idea is that I can kind of add new stuff, new methods onto this if I need to, without breaking backwards compatibility. But you might think that that's naff. So yeah, I kind of want feedback on this. But what I've done here is I've massively simplified how messages look and how you interact with them. So you've got a method as bytes, which makes it explicit that you're extracting the message in bytes form, and if it's not in bytes form currently, so if it's like a structured data type, then as bytes expresses your intention to convert it into bytes if they're not already in that state, and then obviously that can error out, so the return is bytes and an error. I've also considered adding in a bytes method that doesn't do the attempt to convert, so it will return a boolean instead of an error if it's not already in bytes format, and it won't make any attempt to serialize the structured data. But I'm not going to add that for now. I'm just going to keep it to as bytes currently. And then there's a separate method as structured. So I've dropped JSON from the signature, because when you're extracting structured data from a Benthos message in your plugins, it doesn't really it's not JSON anymore. It's just it's a structure. It's a map structure. So the fact that it could have been JSON in a previous life when we parsed it out, it doesn't need to be exposed in the method, and I think it's just confusing, so I've removed it. So now it's as structured. It's basically the same deal where if the message is in structured format, then it returns that as what you get back as an interface, which could be a map, it could be an array, it could be a value type, or it gives you an error if the message was in bytes format and it can't be passed out as JSON, which is the default. So I mean, it pretty much behaves the same as the current message when you try and extract JSON. But yeah, I've just kind of renamed it basically. And then there is a second method called as structured mute. So this gives you what I'm saying is a mutable form, because as structured gives you potentially reference types. So you might be pulling out maps. And so if you mutated that, then technically that's a no-no. What you would have to do is clone, do a deep copy of the entire structure, and then mutate that, and then you would use set structured in order to enrich the message with that new data. However, obviously that doesn't always need to be the case. So mutating structured data is sometimes fine when the message has already been kind of cloned from a source that kind of owns it. And this isn't an optimization that I've already added in. This is something that I will do when we hit version 4. So whenever you call as structured mut, however you want to pronounce that, you'll get back a deep copy that you can do whatever you want. So you would use as structured whenever you want to just query the data or query value types, and you're not modifying it, and that saves you a deep copy of the data. And you'd use as structured mute when you want to actually play around with it and do some stuff. And eventually in the future, this will do a deep copy lazily. So it will only clone the contents when it's absolutely necessary because some other component upstream wants to keep ownership of that data. And then we've got things like copy, so you can do a copy of the message to get a new message. So in cases where your processor is taking in one message and it's going to give back multiple, then copy, rather than creating a brand new message, copy is the way that you should do it, because then the copy will have the same tracing span and context as the original message. So it'll just make it easier to use distributed tracing to understand how these messages have kind of flown through the pipeline. What's the difference between a structured mute and copy? Oh, good question. So copy is a shallow copy. I should definitely make... Oh, okay. So it's a shallow copy of the message itself. So you can do a copy and then do a you can like set the bytes of the message, for example, and what you'll then have is the original message that you copied it from will have the original bytes stored, and they will also share the span ID and all that tracing stuff. So yeah, you can kind of safely mutate, but if you were going to make a copy of a message and you wanted to modify its structured contents, then you would have to call copy, and then you would have to follow that up with extracting the structured data as mutable, just to make sure that you've done that deep clone before you mess with it. And another major change I've made is I've added all the metadata mutation methods to the parent itself. So what used to happen is you would call a method called metadata to extract a new type that allowed you to kind of mess with the metadata of a message. And it was just kind of confusing because obviously it's a reference type, so you can extract the metadata and do some modifications to it, and then you can leave it and send the message on and it will have those changes made. But it doesn't necessarily look that way. It's kind of it just kind of acted a bit weird, and it also made the interface a lot more complicated to implement, because you have to implement an interface returning an interface, which makes it super awkward to add like custom implementations and stuff, and like wrappers and things. So what I've done is I've decided to make all the metadata methods and things part of the message itself. So you've got all the classics. You've got meta delete, meta get. Meta get now returns a boolean, which indicates whether the metadata field exists, because before you just have to see if the string is empty. And there's also meta walk, which is very similar to the, in fact it's almost the exact same as the existing metadata key value walking method. And that's pretty much it. Set bytes and set structured is pretty much the same. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The other thing I'm going to dig into today. So right now, if you have a plugin, let me show you actually. GitHub.com. Interesting Benthos dev. If you look at the existing plugin examples, so when you actually run, so you import all of your plugin definitions and they init themselves, and then what you do is you just call service run, and that will kick off the Benthos CLI. So exactly as it works right now. So you could define a plugin, and then your plugin could be called anything, but you'd be able to do Benthos lint and streams mode, and all these commands will be baked into your custom plugins build. What I've done is, because obviously the service package and also the similar Lambda equivalent, these are in lib. What I've done is I've just just added these as functions within the new service package. So you just call run CLI. So instead of lambda.run, you would call run AWS Lambda. So those are like the sort of conventional ways. That's like the easiest way I think of people embedding plugins is you register your plugin components and then you just run Benthos the exact same as you would run a normal distribution. However, the other thing that people have kind of asked for a few times is I suppose something that's a little bit more akin to like Apache Camel and stuff, where rather than always pointing the Benthos instance that you built to a config file, maybe you want to do something programmatic. So I was maybe just going to have a little quick look at that. Actually, I think I've got a stash with it in. Yeah. Don't know why my GoSum was updated, but whatever. So let me show you what I want this to. So what I've kind of conceived of, because obviously to make solid Go APIs for things, so like imagine you want to instantiate a Kafka input and then you want to kind of plug it in. You can do that right now, and I think I've got a package for showing that actually. Do I? That's probably in Stream actually. Yeah, I've got this API for running a stream, and this one's not that great because maybe I don't really have a good example of it. But yeah, back in the olden days, you could technically you could dig into the internal APIs and you could instantiate the individual connectors that Benthos has and plug them together yourself into a pipeline. I just can't support that forever because those internal components will need to change over time, either to improve them or to make modifications. And it's too much work for me to support a public Go API that hooks deep into the low-level Benthos repo and also have these nice high-level ways of dealing with configs and things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a high-level API for kind of like programmatically building your config, and that's what I've kind of outlined here. So you're going to have to do like a config builder, and then you'll be able to call methods on it to add in like snippets. So here I've got add input YAML, where you can just provide a YAML block to define the input that you want to add to your pipeline. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow you to define as many of these as you want, and it will automatically insert them into like a broker, for example, and kind of orchestrate what you've asked it to do. So if you've called add input multiple times, it will know to wrap those within a broker with the default pattern. But obviously also in the config itself, you could obviously define a broker if you want to do that yourself. But yeah, so the idea is that you can kind of build up programmatically all these snippets, and that's going to include being able to add processes and things and outputs. And what I'm going to do to start with is this is going to be YAML. So the same config spec as an actual Benthos config, except you're kind of doing it programmatically. So you could use this to sort of generate based on some sort of business logic or something, and then spin off the pipeline. The way that you spin it off is going to be something like service.running config, and then provided the builder that you've made. And then eventually I might add stuff like builder, and then, I don't know, add output, and then I don't know, foo, and you'll be able to do stuff like Kafka addresses, I don't know, and then some generic value. And it's going to be a little bit more Go API-ish. And then I think I'll just keep adding slightly lower level APIs. So the real way, the normal way that I would recommend to people is to not use the config builder and instead just run Benthos as a CLI and point it to a config and use it like you would normally use Benthos. But then if people want to do some programmatic stuff, then you've got the option of using a builder. The highest level would be using the builder and inserting YAML configs for the individual component types. And then maybe I add in a slightly lower level one where you can specify like arbitrary key value pairs to define the specific fields in a config. So you're no longer writing YAML, you're writing kind of still sort of, I suppose, stringly typed, you could say, or something like that, where you're just defining these arbitrary key values. And then I'll maybe add an even lower level API where I actually add in, probably with code generation or something, like an actual proper API with Go types. So you'll be able to do add output, and it'll be something like new Kafka input or something, and that would have, you know, some API for maybe it'd be opt funcs or something, builder opt Kafka addresses. So that this kind of thing, like the sort of API that you might expect from a real client library. But I would need to manually maintain these, because at the end of the day, this I would want to keep completely separate from the actual internal component that's being instantiated, because I need to be able to modify them. I need to be able to change their function signatures and things as Benthos evolves. And so there needs to be some sort of air gap between that and these things. Otherwise, there's just too much scope in the project, where I have to maintain backwards compatibility for absolutely everything. So yeah, this is what you'll get for now. I'm in the market for feedback on this, because I would expect the vast majority of people to just call what I showed you earlier, just run CLI, and basically just use Benthos the exact same way with your plugins as you would use it without your plugins. So I kind of need feedback from people who would be interested in something else, to kind of give me more ideas as to what the use cases are. But yeah, I've kind of implemented this in a way where it's just sort of a starting point. We can expand this over time. We can go wherever we want with it. The sky's the limit. Except time. Time is the key. How much time can I invest, and how many people are actually going to use it? Yeah, was there anything else I needed to cover? Tell me. That's pretty much it. I think what I'm going to do... Oh, actually, I can show you what the updates to the plugins package is. So I'm going to leave that as a work in progress. But I also have my Benthos plugin example repo. So this is at on GitHub, Benthos dev /Benthos plugin examples. So this is the traditional repo I put together. That is something that you can literally just clone as a template. Why haven't I made this a GitHub template? That seems a bit odd. I should probably turn this into a GitHub template. I'll do that later. But yeah, this is basically something that you could clone right now, and it's just got examples for how to write an output plugin, for example. So I've gone through the process of updating this, and you can too. So this is currently on a branch, so you'd have to do at plugins v2 if you want this. I think I might actually push the changes I've made. So what I've done is I've inserted the service package under X, so it's public /X/service, and I hope that makes it nice and clear if not this warning does here, that these APIs are not stable. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to push them to the default branch on GitHub, and I'm going to start tagging releases with it so people can actually use it, and you can actually see the docs on the Go docs site. If this is a bad call, because my assumption is that everybody knows what X in the import path is, what it means, but obviously I'm just me, so maybe that's not entirely clear to people, but I definitely still intend to add breaking changes to all this stuff. But if I don't push this to the default branch, so the import paths are going to change before. Yes, so the import path, the import path would actually change before v4 as well. So what I would do is I would keep it under X while it's experimental, and then one day, once I've determined that the API is stable as it currently is, I will just get rid of the X directory, so it's now public/service, just to indicate to everyone that this is a stable package now, you can rely on it. That would still be in version 3, because I've put a huge amount of work into making sure that this package can exist with Benthos as it currently is today without any breaking changes on the back end. So there's a lot of glue happening, but that works. That all the changes that needed to happen in the internal packages is done. So I can have this released stable in Benthos version 3 at some point. So that will be the first phase. The first phase would we reach stability, and I get rid of the X directory, mark it as stable, everybody can use it. Everybody can then migrate from the existing plugin APIs at their leisure to the new ones. Also gives us time to make sure that the APIs are correct for everybody, and that we're all happy with it. And then eventually I'll cut a v4 release and the old APIs will go, but I'm not looking to do that anytime soon. I'm hoping to give people lots and lots of time to move on to the new ones. I don't want to force anybody to make code changes and things if they want the latest versions and fixes. By the way, you might be hearing a bit of distress. I'm not sure if it's getting picked up by the mic, but a female voice in a lot of distress. That's actually my wife, and I just want to calm everybody down. She's not actually in distress. She is rehearsing currently for a play that she's going to be doing at the Progress Theatre, and this is an online play that you can see it via Zoom. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can actually get in on that. So we're not an official sponsor of this stream, but maybe you're interested in that sort of stuff. Progress Theatre in Reading, check them out because they do lots of shows. The one that she's in might be trash, so pinch of salt. What was I saying? So eventually, we'll have a v4 release, and this package will be the only one where you can write plugins. The other thing that I was going to dig into and I forgot to was how inputs and outputs look, because these are quite different to the current APIs. So what I've tried to do is I've tried my best to simplify these as much as possible in order to support inputs of all the different flavors. So you imagine there are some inputs where they're fire and forget, there's no concept of acknowledgements, maybe we're just reading a file or something, and then there's other inputs where we have to be super strict about all kinds of things. So I've tried to make the interface super simple, but you can also I suppose you kind of call it customization, but you can basically tailor it to your specific needs. So the function signature for an input is you've got a connect method, and this is the first thing that gets called. So when your input component is instantiated, Benthos will call connect, and if you return a nil error, then that says to Benthos that your input is going to start pulling messages. And that means that the readiness flags go green, and everything starts moving. The next thing that happens is read gets called. Read is provided a context, so if reading takes a long time, then you might want to check the context to see if things get cancelled, and then you can return a message and an acfunc. I'll show you the signature for that in a minute, or an error. If you return an error, then by default Benthos will consider that to be just a temporary thing, so it's worth calling read again with backoff. And obviously there's metrics automatically. You don't have to do that in your plugin definition. And the readiness check, I think will still be green, in that the assumption is you're still in the process of consuming stuff. But there's also an error type that you can return, which is called, let me have a look. Should be a const. Where are they listed? In GoDocs. Is that going to be in variables? Oh, okay. So there's some things for caches. So there's two errors that your input type can return that have special meaning. The first one is not connected. So if you return that, it means that you try to read a message from your source and you've realized that, oh my God, we've lost our connection. And we can't consume anything right now. So this isn't just you're seeing timeouts or you've just been told to wait or something like that. This is you've lost the connection, something catastrophic has happened and you need to recover the connection now, and you shouldn't be considered active. When you return this from the read method, then what happens is Benthos will stop calling read, and it will set the readiness probes to red, and it will show metrics saying that your connection's gone, and then it will call connect, and it will keep calling connect until you've given it back a nil error. And obviously that's with backoff as well, so you're not stressing out the network trying to reestablish. And then basically once you've returned a nil error, then the readiness probe goes back to green and we start calling read again. So you can use that behavior to force Benthos essentially to deal with backoffs and retries and reconnections and all that stuff. And then hopefully it's nice and simple for you as a plugin implementer. The other error type is a super special one called end of input. And the purpose of that is it's an error that you can return, and it basically says to Benthos, hey, I'm never going to receive more messages, so you might as well just shut down. And that triggers the same behavior that you would see if you were like reading a file, for example, where once the input has been exhausted, if it's the only input, Benthos will gracefully terminate. So it will stop consuming messages, and then it'll wait for all the messages that are currently in flight to flush down the pipeline, and then eventually we'll all live in peace and harmony, and Benthos won't be running anymore. Or if there's other inputs that are also in play because of a broker type or something, then we'll keep the service will still be running until those have been exhausted. But yeah, basically if you return this, then you will stop Benthos from harassing your input. It will just leave it alone. And the other thing is this acfunc. So if you don't care about acknowledgements, then you can just send a no-op acfunc, and just don't worry about it. And then read will be called again, and you can just send another message. But if you do care about acknowledgements, then this function signature, where can we find that in the docs here? Acfunc. So this function signature here, this will be called for every message that you return from your input. This function will happen at some point unless Benthos is terminated. But even if you return end of input or something like that, then when the messages are getting flushed, this function will still be called and you can still register the acknowledgement. And the idea of this is within this function, you would encapsulate the logic to acknowledging that function upstream. So for most component implementations that support acknowledgements, so for example, if you're writing like some custom RabbitMQ plugin, then that's just going to be a simple function call of ACK, this particular message ID or something like that. Or if you're consuming SQS or something like that, then it would be to delete the message. But obviously there's potential there for it to be more complicated. So for example, if you were consuming Kafka, then you would use this to mark a particular offset as ready to commit, provided all prior messages have also already been acknowledged, which is complicated, and that's why you wouldn't implement that yourself. You just use Benthos' existing Kafka connector. And yeah, I think that's it for inputs. The output plugin has had similar treatments. This is a much simpler interface again. And similarly, metrics and readiness probes and all that stuff is baked in as long as you behave accordingly. So now we have a connect method which is the exact same. And what you do is you implement write. So write is super simple. You're provided a context and you're provided a message and you return an error if the message couldn't be delivered. It just can't get any simpler than that, people. It just can't. And you'll notice that this is obviously not batched. So this is just a single message that we're dealing with here. I will add an equivalent output type specifically for batched messages, but I just figured go with the simple signature first, and people can ask for more as and when necessary. But yeah, there will eventually, so just like there's a registered batch processor for processing batches of messages, there will eventually be a batch output. I think, anyway. I reckon. And maybe even a batch input as well, because you might be consuming logical groups of messages and you might want to provide batches for that. The other thing is the output constructor signature is slightly different to all the others. So in most plugin constructor signatures, you return the component type or an error. In the output constructor, you also return a maximum flight number. So the reason for that is it allows you to customize, essentially, because essentially Benthos will be in charge of how many messages your output is able to be asked to send. And that's part of how back pressure works. And if you want to customize how many messages can be sent via your output plugin, then you specify that in this field during construction. And the idea is that you could use your config to determine this number, or if you know your output very well, there might be a sensible number that should just always be the case, and therefore you can just return this as a static string. Sorry, static int. And yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover here. So yeah, let's go back to this thing. So this is my Benthos plugin example repo. So what I've done is I've upgraded Benthos v3 to the latest commit on my plugins v2 branch. I am going to push this. I should push this on a branch, plugins v2, and let me just commit this actually, because I think this is I think this works actually already. Go build cmd. I reckon this will build. So I can run my plugin definitions. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that works. So I can quickly show you what's different about this now. So for example, let's have a look at an input plugin. Here we go. So we've got a config struct, structy type with a default length of 100, which is specified in our config spec. And then when we construct our gibberish thing, and that is this. This is the actual implementation, and it's just a super simple interface because we're not interacting with the service or anything. We're not propagating acknowledgements up, so I'm just generating some bytes, and then I create a new message around those bytes, and that's pretty much it. The registering part, I've put that in my init function. Obviously, this is completely up to you. So the way that I've structured this repo is in your main file, you import a load of packages that define plugins in their init funcs. Some people like that, some people don't. But what I'll say is if you don't like that, then you could just do something like call in your main func, I don't know, cache register plugins or something, and then it'll do it. The other thing you might notice, so similar to the existing API, is that this is a singleton, right? You're registering plugins in some global singleton thing that's keeping track of all the different plugin types. That doesn't have to be the case. I've already refactored the internal packages so that you could potentially have sets of plugin definitions and activate them separately. So you could run a pipeline with some plugin definitions, and you could run a completely separate pipeline in the same process with a different set of plugin types. However, I figured that the overwhelming majority of people wouldn't care to do that. And that's fair enough at the end of the day. So I've gone with the simplest APIs first, and that is defining everything as singletons, but eventually you might be able to do stuff like build a new environment. Env is service.new environment, and you might be able to do things like add cache plugin to that, and then at the end you would do run CLI or something, and that way it's all nice and encapsulated, and yeah, there you go. That init magic is why there's a click ask routine running in Benthos even though you don't use yeah. Yep. Oh, actually that's a really good point. So another thing what I've started doing is you might have noticed this already because it's already in, but there is now a components package in public, and what this does is this provides this actually provides the imports for a bunch of different plugin types that Benthos contains, and essentially in the new world of Benthos, when we actually do go to v4, you'll actually be able to selectively import the native connectors within Benthos. So for example, if you wanted a build of Benthos that was super lean and didn't have any third-party connectors, you could actually choose to just not import them during the build. And obviously because that would break backwards compatibility because there's existing plugin users that aren't expecting that to be the case, I'm only currently doing this with the new components. But for example, it's completely possible today to build and run a Benthos which doesn't include any of the new GCP, MongoDB, Pulsar connectors, in which case it wouldn't have any Pulsar support because that's entirely defined in that service package. I haven't really spoken about it much because you don't really get much benefit from it yet, so there's not really much to get excited about until v4, when everything's back to being good again. Yeah, so what was I doing? I was going back to the plugin example. So yeah, I'm going to push this on a plugins v2 branch, and you'll be able to clone this and see for yourself, and you'll be able to play with it, and you will be able to build stuff with it. I'll tell you what, I'm not going to push the new plugin APIs to the default GitHub branch, and therefore I'm not going to tag any releases. I'm going to keep this as a separate branch for now, just because I am a little bit worried about people using it in prod without realizing it's experimental. But I do need people to try it. I need people to give it a go and experiment with it. And ideally, people who already are using Benthos plugins, because I want to know what's missing. Basically, I want to know what's not possible with the new APIs that is possible with the old ones. And I also want to know... whether the APIs are actually nicer to use, because I think they are, but there might be certain component types people have built that don't work well in the new APIs world. The binary is 93... Is it? 93 meg? Well, yeah. So yeah, I mean, there's an obvious case for reducing the number of things baked into it. So it's been on my list for a little while. Also, the selfish reason for wanting that is because it allows me to have very lean WebAssembly builds. So it makes it even more feasible than currently to embed Benthos in browser tools and web apps, which would be pretty cool. Was there anything else I wanted to cover today? I think that's pretty much it. I'm pretty tired. If you just joined this stream, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I think that's me done for today. I think it's hot bath time, and maybe a biscuit. But yeah, I desperately need feedback. So I'm gonna open up that discussion on GitHub. That'll be the primarily bestly way to give me feedback and ideas. And then obviously on the Discord and Slack, if you want to message me through that, then that's also a perfectly fine way of providing me feedback, but it's not as convenient. Yeah, hopefully we can get this stable pretty quick. I like to move fast with stuff like this, and I would like to get this stable quickly so that people have more time to migrate. In fact, I'll tell you what. No, I won't do it now. I'm going to do it off stream. Right, everybody. This has been a great time. I've gotten to know you all a little bit more than I did before. I'm thankful that the internet is able to accommodate these engagements between me and Mihai and literally nobody else, because everybody else is too shy. If you enjoyed this stream, then I would say you liked the stream, and therefore maybe it would be logical to actually give it a thumbs up on YouTube. If you would like more of these, then similarly, there is an avenue for ensuring that, and that is to subscribe on YouTube, and that way my number of subscribers goes up, and I feel more fulfilled in life. Don't give it a thumbs down. And if you're going to leave a comment, then make sure it's a good one. Don't waste my time. Don't waste everybody else's time as well. I don't think they'd appreciate that. If you've got a good comment, then yes, add it. In fact, actually, if you have a trash comment, then you can still post it, but prefix it with an underscore, so we know it's trash before we bother reading it. Sorry that there wasn't much coding, even though there was plenty of code. I'm sure that's going to rustle some people's jimmies, and maybe lose me a few subs. But at the end of the day, I'm not here to please everybody. I'm not just here to entertain. This is a bit of a transaction between me and yourselves. So at the end of the day, if you're going to make an omelette, you're going to break some eggs. And I'm not going to apologize for that. if somebody knows a way of generating docs locally, such as the way that they appear on the new Go Docs site, I don't suspect they have open sourced any of that stuff, but if you know of a way, then please do let me know as well. And yeah, peace out. Look after yourselves. Don't look after anybody else, because if we all just looked after ourselves, then nobody would need looking after anymore. And maybe that's more efficient. So yeah, bye.